How's it going, ladies and gentlemen? And welcome back to another edition of LandO's Lock-ins, the series in which we do our darndest. We do our very best to make the most accurate CDL pick'em predictions possible. That is right. I'll tell you what, folks, I am so excited for this episode today. It is crazy to think that we are already almost at the Texas Major. It feels like this season has absolutely flown by. We've got 10 more matches before we will be in Texas. I hope to see you guys there. Last year, this event was amazing. It was one of my favorites alongside of the New York home series. Texas is obviously like a second home to me, so I'm excited to be going back after just recently moving away like 2 months ago. So it's pretty wild that we're already going to be back in Texas. Back at the esports stadium, but I hope to see you guys there. If not, make sure to be staying tuned in because it's going to be incredible. And it's going to be incredible because we're getting ready to have tons of major matchups. Like, I don't know what I'm calling the title of this video, but we have got some wild games, some major series going down between some of the best teams in the league right before we go into Texas. But if this is your first time, I want to say welcome. Thank you so much for checking out this video of mine. We do a bunch of different content here on the channel, and I will say, if you are watching this video, we have a vlog coming out very soon, potentially tomorrow. We will see on the timeline of it all, but I've got a vlog coming. Super excited for you guys to check that out. A little bit of footage from Boston, also showing you guys what it is like to be an esports caster, casting online matches for the CDL. So I'm excited to show you guys that. It's like an hour long, so we got a lot of content coming very soon. But let's go ahead, get back, get focused, and take a look at how we did last week when it came down to pick'ems. In a pretty solid week at that. I think I came in being like, I don't really know how this week's going to go. We did pretty well. We did make some shifts. We did change up a few picks here and there, but obviously it ended up being a smart decision in the end. You guys can take a look at where we did, where we were correct. The losses, did not expect for Toronto Ultra to come out with the straight fire versus OpTic Texas. I had my doubts a little bit with the new lineup. I thought at least it was going to go to a game 5. Not at all the case. Toronto closed the door in 3. And then on the other side, I just thought that Boston would probably beat Florida. Not at all the case. The Mutineers showed up and got their first series victory there over the breach. So yeah, that's where we went wrong overall. Very happy with the results of last week. As we said, we go 80% overall. I will take that, especially with how crazy God is nowadays, whether it's Vanguard or MW2. Feels like sometimes the results are just almost impossible to predict. But that does not stop us from trying to go flawless. That is right. That's the goal for this week. Can we go flawless, potentially? I would love that. We want to take a look, though, at our slate of 10 matches. We've got some big ones. We've got some great ones. I'm eyeing up a few of them in particular, but I think it's fair to go ahead and jump right on in, right? Let's try to make this not 3 hours long. I think that should be also a good goal of ours. So let's go and jump into Seattle versus London. We're jumping into double points already. I absolutely love this. But yeah, this is going to be their third matchup of the season so far. Seattle is 2-0 on the year. For Seattle, right, very promising Major 3 so far. Right now, they've got a 2-1 record, and considering how horrible that they looked at Major 2, I would say this is pretty good. And the one loss that they have, which is versus the LA Thieves, they look good at it. They look very good in that series despite the loss. I feel like more people were talking about Seattle more than LA Thieves, even though the Thieves ended up beating Seattle in that series. Surge are also off of a nice 3-1 victory over Florida. Questions are still out there. Is Seattle's Search and Destroy finally back? It's too early to tell because they're only winning on one map right now, which is Hotel Search and Destroy. So I would say if I am any team out there when it comes out of map vetoes, just don't give Seattle Hotel Search Destroy. Test your luck a little bit. Or rather, test theirs, I guess would actually be how you want to phrase it. On the other side for London, I mean, they've had one of the more wilder qualifiers that they've experienced as a franchise in recent memory. We can go through a few of these, or I guess all of them so far. They lose a 3-1 series versus Boston, where they allowed for the opening hardpoint of that series to be won by Breach, despite being up 248 to like 215. They later go on to lose that series in a game 5, so they absolutely should have beaten the Boston Breach in that series, but they don't. They go on to face off against the Atlanta FaZe. Everybody's like, okay, this is going to be a very quick series, and while it did result in a 3-0, every map was close. It was a 30-point hardpoint game. It was a round 11 search destroy where London threw it away, allowed for Atlanta to continue on with their absurd search destroy winning streak. They allow for a BZ to clutch at a 1v3 in that final round as well. They go on to lose a round 5 in control. And then their most recent series, the most recent series that we've seen in the CDL, a crazy, one of the best series of the year by far. I highly suggest, it wasn't just because I casted it, even though you guys should check it out anyway because of that reason. But the reason why I would say it is because that was one of the craziest series I have ever casted in my life. Off of the game versus London versus Gorillas. London finally are able to capture a W this qualifier. We saw Exceed clutch a 1v4 on the Mercado Search Destroy. We saw where the game was basically on the line. Assault clutches out a 1v3 in control, of which he has 1 HP left, which then allows for LAG to stay alive. So basically they were down 2-0. Assault stays alive, gets 3 players, captures the point. That then sends us to the next round. From that point on, LAG, off of that play, would manage to win 3 rounds straight in control. And then we moved into a game 5, that of which London was up 4-2. LAG ends up coming back. They force a round 11. They are up in a 2v1. And Nasty ends up clutching out not just the 2v1, but a 1v1 versus Assault. And that is the way that the Ravens qualifier has gone so far. So they sit right now with a 1-2 record, and it makes you question a little bit, like, does this win for the Ravens give them some extra life? Like, they've been so close. You know, have they finally been able to figure it out a bit? They look much better with the role change lately. I feel like Nasty, as he's talked about it in interviews, is more back to his natural role. I feel like Paul was making some great plays now with the Vaznev in hand. It feels like Ravens definitely have the ability to threaten top teams on occasion. The question is, how much is that threat? Like, is it a threat to win? Is it a threat to contest? The one thing that you really can say is that it's a threat to contest. They beat LAG, wonderful. However, the Gorillas now have yet to win a series so far. So it's not saying a ton. However, we know right throughout these qualifiers that the Ravens have been able to at least take Atlanta FaZe pretty decent distance, or at least in terms of the game specifically. They went up versus Boston as well and held their own. So for Seattle here, I don't know. I just feel like right now Surge are in such great spirits. I still question the Search Destroy. However, I feel like when it comes down to respawn matchups, I just like Seattle to walk away with those. I feel like Surge are going to come out with an opening hard point, and then they possibly let the S&D slide. I still like them to win control, and I think that they also could win that game for a hard point as well. Is there a chance this goes 5? Maybe, honestly. It really just comes down to the Search Destroys. It depends on how well the Ravens play out of the gates, but I am going to give Seattle the understanding dub here. Give them their props, give them their dues. And I believe that for Seattle, they also do have, another game this week versus New York. So it's a pretty big week for Seattle. They've started off well. 1 W here puts them in a great spot to get a winner's bracket position at the Texas Major. We'll go and take a look at the fan poll, and not surprising, 85% going for Seattle. So we're going to kind of go with the crowd on this one, and we will jump on forward to our next series, that of which is Minnesota taking on the Las Vegas Legion. I'll pull up the fan poll. I want to make sure that is showing for everybody out there. This is what I worried about, right? This is what I was worried about when it came down to the rocker. It feels like Major 2 was just really a flash in the pan. They go for a top 3 finish, and ever since then, they have yet to win a series. They are 0-3 so far in Major 3. They lose that Game 5, Round 11 versus New York, and then they've had back-to-back 3-0 losses versus Seattle and OpTic Texas. They're currently on a 7-game S&D losing streak. They're on a 4-game control losing streak. The reason for that is because Rocker will not play Hotel. Everybody keeps banning El Asilo, so they're playing Fortress over and over and over again, and they cannot win it. So one of the biggest crazy moments, I guess one of the crazier stats that we have, I feel like right now that nobody's really talking about, is for the Minnesota Rocker. Obviously, they're 0-3. Nobody's playing well. Nobody's playing good enough to get W's. But really, to me, it's the dramatic dip that we've seen in productivity from the SMGs of Rocker, right? We were giving so much props to Bance and Afro at Major 2. Understandably so. They were looking like unbelievable talents. Like, it was Bance and the respawns. It was Afro and the Search Destroys. Bance goes for a top 5 overall KD at that Major. finishes with a 1.17. He was the second best SMG in stats across all respawns. So we're talking overall, we're talking hardpoint, and we're talking control. He was top 5 in all of those, and he was the second best SMG in all of those categories, which is wild. It really is. I think it was just behind Hydra, who didn't even last that long at the tournament. So we're talking Bance playing, even better competition. He was still putting up numbers like that. Then for Afro, I mean, Mr. Aggressive, tons of pop-off maps at the Boston Major, sports like a 1.53 S&D KD at that tournament. Just looked absolutely fantastic. And then fast forward a few weeks to where we are right now, and both of these guys sit as the 47th and 49th overall KD here at our Major 3 qualifiers. That is horrific. Like, I don't know if I have seen that dramatic of a dip between, the highest of highs and just the absolute lowest of lows. And it doesn't end there. Bance and Cammy are number 48 and number 49 in Search Destroy KD so far throughout our Major 3 qualifiers. Afro went from a 1.53 S&D KD at Major 2 to a 0.69. Like, that's half. That's literally half of what his KD was at the Boston Major. And then to top it all off, we're talking control, Afro and Bance. Again, the SMGs, the guys who were, bringing them so much life and control. They are number 48 and number 49 in overall KD in that mode. I don't know. I'll be honest. I really don't know what to say about the Minnesota Rocker, other than that I feel like this could potentially be the final few online matches that this roster plays together. I really do. I think that there is a very good chance that at best they finish 1-4. They have 2 matches this week. Very good chance that at best they finish 1-4 and then maybe get rounded at the Major. Like they just go into Texas, they lose their opening matchup depending on what it is, and then they make a change. That to me is honestly the most likely scenario right now. I don't know if for Bance and Afro it's just a dramatic, change up in terms of play style. I don't think that Bance and Afro are horrible players, obviously. Like, we know that Afro is one of the best players in the game, at least from an SMG standpoint. Bance was looking impeccable. I think, at least in my eyes, it's more of a gameplay starting to translate, trying to figure some things out. I think it's also not helping that if Minnesota are winning hard points, or if they're not winning their search destroys, and then now they're also not winning their controls. So for a team, a franchise that has historically struggled mightily in the hard points, you're now having to rely on those solely because you're not winning anything else. So with that in mind, just not a great spot right now for Rocker. And I've talked about it consistently and constantly. I'll probably make a video on it once the Major ends. I think that for me, Minnesota Rocker, even going into this Major, I even said it after they finished top 3. I think this is the perfect landing spot for Illy. I really do. I feel like this is the spot for him to land. Can run the main AR, get attached to a flex, speed up the pace of the team a little bit, allow for Bance and Afro to hopefully, get back to their regular form. Illy can bring out that sniper and search destroy, bring that methodical mindset, the great in-game comms to a team that really needs the improvement in S&D right now. So that's the way that I look at it. We'll talk about that at another date. But again, a very worrisome time if you're a Minnesota Rocker fan. Just total elation at the Boston Major, and now it is straight depression. We'll move on to Vegas. Had a very rough and very tough opening few matches. I think, honestly, if you're a Vegas fan, you could be pretty okay with the fact that you're now 1-2, given that you faced off against the LA Thieves. You faced off against the new Toronto Ultra, now with Hixie, and Atlanta FaZe. You're facing off against what could be considered the 3 best teams in the game. I know LA Thieves online necessarily isn't the same LA Thieves on LAN, but you get my point. And honestly, when it comes to this week, they stand a pretty good chance of at least going 1-1 in my eyes. I even think that they have a good chance of potentially going 2-0 this week, as they've got Minnesota and LAG. I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I just do feel like I'm going to go with Vegas. I know that you can see the fans are, definitely thinking more about it. They're like, okay, Minnesota, LAG, I'm going to go Rocker. Wait a second. Rocker have not been looking great lately. So with that, I also side with it as well. I think that Vegas ended up taking this series. I'm hesitant to go for either a game 4 or a game 5. I do think that Rocker shows some life. I do. I think if there was a chance for them to win those hard points, it would be versus Vegas, who sometimes are good and sometimes are just on the cusp of being great. and a few hard points here or there. We know their hard point record is not great. And then Search Destroys, I don't think Rocket are going to be able to hang there. And I don't know, I just always hesitate for a team that's good at winning S&Ds, but not good at winning hard points. Like, round 5 in Control is just a round 5 in Control. Like, if we see a Fortress in this game, which is very possible, you just need Minnesota to make one play, right? I mean, they just make one play, they capture one zone or one extra tick on a zone. They've got defense for round 5, and they now stand at a 90% chance of winning that Control overall. So it's a difficult call to make, but I'm just going to say that Vegas ends up winning it. It could be a very dicey one. I expect Rocker to probably have their best fight that they've had throughout their last few series, but this is just not a great time for them. They've got to dig deep, as they've got Vegas, and then they have the next series versus the LA Thieves. Not going to be an easy time. Let us go ahead and see the last series of Friday, that being the Florida Mutineers taking on the LA Gorillas. Fan poll is telling us that it is very, very close. I like this. I like the fact that it's basically 50-50 right now. We'll talk about Florida first. Tough qualifiers, right? Tough qualifiers for them so far. They ended up making the major roster change. Havoc is the only guy who ends up staying on this team from the previous iteration of it. We see Brack obviously make his comeback. We see Capsule and Fellow making their returns to the CDL, but also, were previously in Challengers. I know that the instant emphasis for a lot of people about Florida is like, you know what? And I know that Capsule said it in the interview. Florida, they started off playing two very, difficult opponents. They played off against, the major 1 winners and the major 2 winners. I get that. And I think it's a good quote. However, I don't know. It just feels like for Florida, a 1-3 record, you have faced off against some very stiff competition. You do have the great upset versus Boston. And maybe it's just because, I don't know, I just want to see a few more maps, a few more close series from the Mutineers. But the thing that has made me the most frustrated is the fact that they have only got one S&D victory to their name so far. And I really thought that this was going to be one of the best S&D teams that we had in the game, right? I mean, we know that Florida is incredible at it, and I get that they changed up their roster, but Brack has been incredible at S&D all season, whatever he's been in the starting lineup. We know what Havoc can do in this mode. Capsule was the reason why Boston was as good as they were to kick off Vanguard last year. And once they released him, they just tanked in S&D after that. And then you bring in Fellow, who's been, making unbelievable strats forever. And just an incredible mind when it comes out of that mode as well. So I don't know, for Florida, it's like they have absolutely improved in hardpoint, but it just feels like when it comes down to S&D, like it's just not the team that I thought they were going to be. And when it came down to that last series they had versus Seattle, I mean, granted, Seattle, they'd won a hotel S&D. It feels like that is just their game mode right now, but I just expected to see a better showing from Florida in that Search Destroy. Like I said, their 3 losses are 6-1, 6-2, and 6-2. They beat Boston on a Fortress 6-2, which is just their best map overall so far throughout this season in S&D. I don't know. I hesitate right now for the Mutineers to be like, yes, I love Florida. This is a great change. This is everything I wanted it to be. It's not that way. But this is a big game for them. Right now, like I said, they're at 1-3. Last series is here versus the Gorillas. They can finish 2-3 and have a chance of getting into the winner's bracket. And a victory here versus Gorillas would be massive, considering that LAG has 2 games this week. You don't want to have a situation where you're allowing for a very close contestant, like somebody who's right next to you right now, to get a victory while you lose at the same time. Lots of seeding when it comes down to our more bottom teams in this game. On the other side for the Gorillas, team that I'm more frustrated with, to be honest with you. I think that this team is also on the verge of what could be some possible changes, especially if this series does not go their way. Like I said, they had that wild game versus the Ravens where they have constant clutches, a 1v4, from Exceed, which was crazy. Assault makes that, wild 1v3 in the Control happen that allows for them to make the O2 comeback in that Control as well. They basically experienced a heartbreaker after what was so many incredible clutching moments. But at the same time, you have to realize this for the Gorillas. I mean, if Assault doesn't make one of the craziest plays that I've seen in a Control so far this year, London 3-1's LAG and we just move on. Like, that's it. And so that is the element right now for LAG. They're 1-9, I want to say, in their last 10 hard points after being like 7-0 whenever this team originally formed together. it feels like for the Gorillas, like this new lineup, the reason why they came together was to be great at hardpoint, and now they're having to adapt because that's just no longer working. We've seen them make dramatic improvement in their S&D and specifically in their control. They've gone on a wonderful run lately. I think they're 4-2 since Major 2 in control. They've only lost to Boston in that mode. However, like I said, they should have lost that control versus the Ravens. Regardless, though, let's just go and get to predictions for this series. As we said, for the community, it's basically a 50-50. I know how I'm going to go with this one. I'm going to go with Florida to win this in a Game 5. I think we've got back-to-back Game 5s here on Friday. I just think that Florida stands a better chance, as odd as it sounds, in the hard points. If we were talking about these two teams in Major number 2, I'm saying LAG is smoking Florida in the hard points. However, a month later, a month down the road, it is basically a flip-flop. Not that Florida's one of the best hardpoint teams in the game, but just in terms of LAG, their productivity level, I just don't see it being there. I will say that for sure, I mean, Gorillas stand a scary chance of winning S&D in control versus Florida, who, like I said, just is not as scary in that mode as it stands for the moment. Their control is also not great. I just think that Florida end up coming away with the W here. It's not really me looking at records. It's not me pointing out specific stats. I just think that Florida end up walking away with this series some way, somehow. I can give my best predictions however I'd like, but I just think that the Mutineers take it away in 5. Let's go ahead and take a look at Saturday, double points, LA Thieves versus the Minnesota Rocker. We're going to take a look at the fan vote for this one. 87% to 13%. So we were looking at this one earlier. You can see the fans are definitely like, I'll give them the W versus Vegas, but I'm not going to give them the W versus the Thieves, which I think is interesting. We'll talk about Thieves first. We've already talked about Rocker. For LAT, in and out this past week. They had that big series versus Seattle where, they were able to beat them in a 3-1 fashion. Considering it was LAT online, historically, it is a nice victory for them to take. Like I said, Surge are a hot team right now. The fact that you were able to slow them down was impressive. It was nice, but as we said, it was a very close series across the board. We all know, right? Like, the Thieves are going to be a team that just dramatically sees much more success when it comes down to LAN. But they want to make sure that they're in a winner's bracket spot when it comes down to it. Prior to that, they had beaten the Atlanta FaZe, which was huge for them. Prior to that, they lost versus Las Vegas Legion. So right now they're 2-1. They win here versus Minnesota. They're guaranteed to have the winner's bracket spot, I believe, for the OpTic Texas Major. So they should be feeling pretty good about it. For Minnesota, I have them off of a loss versus Las Vegas. I think after being 0-4, this team will be pretty down momentum-wise. I'm pretty much kind of... I don't know if I had any stock in Rocker, to be honest with you. I mean, there was a few aspects of me that were like, you know what? I need to give this team their props when it came down to LandO's tiers, etc. But I'm pretty much giving away any stock that I had in Minnesota. Sorry, folks. I had a cut there for a moment. I was just delivered a lovely little coffee. So now we're energized. We're ready to go for the rest of this. I kind of forget what I was talking about, to be honest. But we're just going to go ahead and say our prediction for this one. I just think the Thieves come out and win this. I think the Thieves come through with the swiftness. Is there a chance that Minnesota comes out with a bit of life? For sure. I think especially if they win that series versus Vegas, there's a chance that they continue to fight. However, I think this is going to be a 3-0. That's right. I'm not going to give Minnesota a map. I just like LAT in situations like this, to be honest. Like, just to kind of be the dream crushers, if you will. I feel like oftentimes Thieves are just not a team that likes to mess around. If they're hot, they will be. At the bare minimum, I think that this could see a Game 4, maybe a Game 5, but I just don't see a world in which Thieves lose this series. I think they're in great spirits right now. They're in a good spot. They're there winning their controls. S&D, we'll see how they look when it comes down to major time, but ultimately in hardpoints, which is Minnesota's strongest mode, that is where LAT has seen a lot of their success lately. So with that being the case, I think that we say LAT wins it and we move on to our next game, which is Vegas versus the Gorillas. So I've got Vegas. This is a big one based off of like matchups where teams sit right now. So I have Vegas off of a win versus Minnesota. That is not what the fans say. So keep that in mind. So that makes them 2-2. LAG, I have them off of a loss versus Florida. Fans are calling that basically a 50-50 game. I am going with the slight underdog to win that, which means that LAG coming into this are 0-4. The reason why I say that is because that is incredibly important coming into this based off of where both these teams' mindsets could be when it comes down to the bracket side of things, where these teams could be. Vegas sit in a great spot according to my predictions, while LAG do not. So there is that to consider. Both these teams could be 1-3 coming into this matchup, and this could basically be a last hurrah for one of them to possibly get winner's bracket at the OpTic Texas Major. So we will keep that in mind. However, we're talking about this in the format of which I already have it. So just wanted to bring that out there. So like I said, a much bigger series for Vegas if the results wind up that way. And to be honest, I mean, if LIG are still not winning their hard points, I think this is a great matchup for Vegas. Vegas will make hard points close from time to time, and we know that they're going to win search destroys versus pretty much anybody in the league outside of the Atlanta FaZe. So there's a good chance that, if we're talking about matchup-wise, prediction-wise, that Vegas could start things off 1-0. And then if they do that, they're definitely starting it off 2-0. LIG have looked better in control. I actually want to see Vegas's recent records in control. So they lose 3-0 on a CeeLo versus FaZe. Prior to that, they lose in around 5 versus Ultra, and then they end up beating Thieves on a hotel in round number 5. So they've gotten a little bit better at their controls. I know a lot of people are excited about 2Real, his impact in that mode specifically. So there's a chance that Vegas also could contend in that game number 3 as well. But I don't know. I just feel like this is going to be one that Vegas closed out pretty quickly. Like, I don't know. I just don't have a whole lot of faith in Minnesota and LAG. That's basically what I'm trying to say in these matchups, where I just feel like, whether it is an upset or it's not an upset, I just don't have a whole lot of hope in both of these rosters right now. I think that they are going to be down. I think both of them are not going to finish with a good record. Maybe both of them don't even finish with wins at all. And so with that, I think this is going to be a 3-1. I don't know. There's not a whole lot to it. I just think that Vegas are in higher spirits. They have more to fight for. If they're coming off of a win versus Rocker, they have to be feeling great about that. Like I said, they've had a very tough schedule up to this point. And if LAG, lose to Florida, that is back-to-back losses versus 2 bottom 4 teams. If they lose to a third team in the bottom 4, that just goes to show that they are absolutely the worst team in the league, and it's not close. So let's jump forward. Let's get some positivity in here. Goodness sake. Let's go ahead and talk about London versus Toronto. I'll go ahead and say it right now. Before we even talk about this series in depth, I am worried for London here. Given Ultra's track record recently, they look to be one of the hottest teams, if not the hottest team in the league, in terms of like where they've been versus where they are now. I am so impressed with what I've seen from this Ultra lineup. I'll be honest, I was a little worried. I was a little worried about the addition of Hixie. They're investing a lot in the other 3 to be consistent. Kleenex hasn't always been the most consistent player. Insight has always been like good and great. But you just kind of had your doubts, like whether or not how this team was going to play. With the recent addition of him, like how are they going to perform versus some of our top caliber teams? And they have looked absolutely phenomenal. Well, I do feel like there was a bit of a honeymoon element to this. The numbers speak for themselves. I mean, Kleenex and Scrappy, to me, feel like one of the scariest duos right now that we have in the league. Since the addition of Hixie, Kleenex 1.17, Scrappy a 1.12, Insights at a 1.17 as well. They are 9-1 in map count so far, and they're off of back-to-back 3-0 wins versus OpTic and versus New York. I will say this: teams need to get rid of Hotel Hardpoint versus Toronto. 3 straight opening hardpoint wins on that very mode and that very map. I was looking at it whenever they ended up beating Vegas on it, whatever, right? They beat them basically by 100 points. They then face off against OpTic, who had one of the most dominant hotel hardpoints that we've seen this season. Coming into that game where they beat LAG, everybody's popping off. They then face off against Toronto and nearly get 100-point clubbed. New York, they love themselves some hotel hardpoint, and they lost to Toronto by about 15 points. So with that in mind, we'll see how London does the vetoes of this, but I just like Toronto up and down. I mean, they look fantastic. Their controls, they've won every single one so far at S&D. The only loss that they have is versus Vegas. They do go to a round 11 versus Toronto, versus OpTic Texas in that series. But I think right now you have to love what you're seeing from the Ultra. I think that they win this series in a 3-0. I think they keep the momentum rolling. Fan vote, understandably so, is siding with Toronto in a major way. I do as well. Let us go ahead and take a look at one of the big games for this week. OpTic Texas versus the New York Subliners. OpTic Texas, this is a huge week for them. I'll be honest, this entire qualifier has been huge for them. They have had constant big matchups. We talked coming into this, overall qualifier, this major three in general, that they had the on paper toughest schedule out of any team in the CDL. And this is really the part where it starts to get probably its scariest. You've got the New York Subliners, and then the following day, you've got the Atlanta FaZe. Now we'll see, when it comes down to their record, right now they sit at 2-1. So already you stand a decent chance of getting into the winner's bracket. But if things do not go well versus New York, if things do not go well versus the Atlanta FaZe, they could be in danger of not making it into the winner's bracket side. So really for OpTic, that 3-0 hurts. The 3-0 win versus Minnesota helps. So there are some positives working in their favor, some things not. But basically what you want to do is, if you're going to lose both of these series, at least play well. At least go to a game 5 or a game 4 in both of these. What you do not want to see is back-to-back 3-0 losses. That very well could spell disaster for them. But like I said, a huge week, for OpTic Texas facing off against New York first. I don't know. I don't take a whole lot away from their opening week. It just felt like they absolutely fell flat versus Toronto, which was definitely worrying for sure. They get pretty much smacked around in both of the respawns. I think that's more of Toronto just looking great than it is OpTic anything else. They take down a Minnesota team where I feel like they are just not in a great spot. I think the Minnesota does not even win they don't win a single series this qualifier. So, you faced off against arguably one of the hottest teams and arguably one of the coldest teams right now in the CDL. And you got 3-0'd by one, and then you 3-0'd the other. So I don't take away a ton right now. My question for OpTic is just simply when it comes down to, I feel like they're going to be a really good hardpoint team. Where does the S&D sit? A lot of people are going to say, oh my gosh, they beat Minnesota 6-1 on LSC though. I'm tired of seeing people constantly talk about how Minnesota is a good S&D team. Not anymore. Okay. Can we stop this? Minnesota is no longer, as it currently stands, a good search and destroy team. They have previously been basically every year of the CDL, but they are not right now. Alrighty, folks, apologies, had another little break, but we're back. I'm going to talk about New York a little bit, right? We talked enough about OpTic Texas. Let's chat a bit about NYSL. And right now for New York, I don't know. They're one of the more difficult teams to pinpoint as it currently stands. They have the 3-0 loss versus Toronto Ultra. They take down Florida prior to that. They win the game 5 round 11 versus Minnesota. They get the revenge versus Rocker after the Boston Major loss that they had. I don't know. It just feels like for NYSL, they're a team on occasion that has those series where they just don't look like themselves. They had that 3-1 loss versus Seattle moving into Major 2. They get 3-0'd by the Thieves. It was very close 3-0, but they get 3-0'd by the Thieves when everybody thought that was going to be a banger of a match at the Boston Major. And then they have this loss versus Toronto where, NYSL, they're supposed to be a team that's, just underneath Atlanta and LA Thieves. And so we talk about frustrating losses from, somebody who follows the storylines and, wants to tell the stories. That to me is a frustrating loss for New York. I mean, this is a team that is supposed to be, like I said, just below Atlanta, just below LAT. The fact that Ultra, who has just now made this roster change and, is supposed to be fiery, New York is a team that's at least supposed to contest them. The fact that they lose both of those, or rather lose this series in a 3-0 fashion, it does worry you a bit. It does worry you about New York's position. I mean, are they actually a team that is going to consistently be here? Are they going to allow for, those hot rosters to come in and take their spot as being just underneath the two top dogs in the game? I don't know. It's a question that New York will have to answer. And this is one of those opportunities. I mean, if you lose to Toronto and then OpTic Texas, two teams who are off of a roster change, what does that say about NYSL? Does it say that they're almost like a thing from the past? I think that it definitely does say that. And I will say the last thing about NYSL before we get into the prediction of this series, which we should go ahead and have up the fan poll, even though we know where it's going to side. But the last thing that I will say about NYSL is that they're interesting because I feel like they always have like one game mode that's just slightly behind, or at least lately, after the Major 1 victory where everything looked fantastic. It always feels like something's slightly off, right? Like at the Boston Major, they didn't win a single search destroy. Since then, they've been a much better S&D team. They're 3-1 so far in our Major 3 qualifiers. However, the hardpoint has started to take a little bit of a hit. They're 1-3 in hardpoint since the Boston Major. So getting into predictions for this, I'll be totally honest. Like, I actually do think that this goes to a game 5. I have gone back and forth on who I feel like will take this. In a game 5, you can kind of throw away statistics. You can almost kind of get rid of, S&D records or whatever it may be. But I am going to say that OpTic does win this. I am. I'm going to say that OPTX ends up winning this just for the fact that I do feel like, again, the same reiterating aspect of the fact that I'm just, for right now, New York, I'm not 100% sold. I think that I like the OpTic change a little bit more than others do. And I think that their S&D is at least going to be okay. Like, I don't think they're going to be a horrible S&D team. I mean, 3/4 out of this team were just incredible in S&D. I know they lose their sniper, but I feel like lately they should be allowing for Dan to start sniping more in the search destroys. I don't know. I feel like OpTic has the chance to be a very scary hardpoint team, one of the best hardpoint teams in the game. I mean, that should translate to control at least over time. And then in S&D, I feel like they're not going to be bad either. So it's just a hard call right now. I like OpTic more in the hard points for this series. In S&D, like I said, for NYSL, they are getting better. And then if we're talking about, the control, for example, I think that you could really sway that either direction. Lately, New York has kind of been 50-50 in their controls for OPTX. That has obviously been an emphasis for them to try and work on lately. But yeah, I think this just ends up going to a game 5. I like OpTic that just a little bit more. So I give them the W, and we move on to talk about New York again, as they will be in a back-to-back situation now versus Seattle. So another huge opportunity for them the following day. At this point, NYSL would be 2-2. So this is a huge game for them, right? 2-3 versus 3-2. That could be the difference between getting winner's bracket or not. That could be the difference between a high up seed or not. On the other side for Seattle, I have them off of the win versus London, bringing their record now to 3-1. And we will truly figure out in the series versus the Ravens whether or not Seattle has hit their stride in Search Destroy. I still do have my suspicions, and I don't know. Like, I'm looking at the prediction that I have on paper, and I just don't know if I agree with it. I don't know if I 100% agree with it right now, whether or not I give the W to New York or if I give it to Seattle. So talking over it in my head, you like Seattle more in the hard points, just given straight up the fact that, like I said, New York, they're struggling in their hard points right now, at least in the small sample size. Seattle, they've been relying on hard point all season long. S&D, Seattle are winning Hotel Search Destroy, and that technically is it. For New York, they're kind of winning on most maps. They have a W on Mercado. They have a win on Hotel. They have a win on Fortress. And then when we talk about control, I feel like that's a 50-50. Both teams are talented when it comes down to control. New York right now in control are number 2. Seattle right now are number 6. So there is that element to it. I don't know. Like, I'm still going back and forth with my head. I am going to say that NYSL comes out on top of this game. This is another huge series, one of the ones that I've been talking about, coming into this week. It's a hard one to call, but I'm just going to say that the Subliners take it in 5. I think it comes down to S&D. I think we finally do test Seattle's Search Destroy prowess. Can they finally win something other than Hotel? If it goes the distance, we learn that Surge are just a little bit behind still. They need to do some more fine-tuning when it comes down to their S&D before the major. That would give NYSL a 3-2 record. That would give Seattle, who are currently 2-1 coming into this week, I believe also a 3-2 record. Is that right? Yes, it would. It would give them both of these teams a 3-2 record. So that should lock them up pretty nicely and make things much more difficult for pretty much everybody else who is fighting with those 2 and 3 records, as we said earlier. But like I said, this could be a New York NYSL situation if Seattle are looking good in the hard points. But I don't know. I think this is just going to be a back and forth series. I think New York have back-to-back very, very fun and wild games, but they're able to at least go with a 1-1 record to close it out. Alrighty. It is time to talk about OpTic versus Atlanta FaZe. The most fun matchup, I think, on paper that we've got in the league. This is the rematch for Major 2. That was one of the best series that we've seen this season. To refresh you a little bit, Atlanta went up 2-0. Dominant games. Like, I want to actually go back and see what those records were. It was an Embassy win, 250-189. An Embassy Search Destroy victory, 6-1. And then OpTic woke up. They won a round 5 in control. We do see a insane hotel hardpoint that ends out being a 2-point game. Dashy drops a 40 bomb, and then OpTic ends up winning the Game 5 Fortress Search and Destroy in round 10 to complete the reverse sweep, and the rest is history. I know we already talked a bit about OpTic Texas. This is, like I said, a huge week for them. That series versus NYSL is almost everything. They could be, I have them, down as being in a good spot after a W like that. So they would be 3-1. They very well could be 2-2. And if that is the case, this puts a whole lot more pressure on all of those players' shoulders to come away with the W versus Atlanta. But like I said, I have them in a better spot coming into it. For FaZe, this is the only series that they have this week. So they're going to have a very good chance to be able to do a little bit of prep coming into this game, be able to watch OpTic play against the NYSL side and really see maybe some tendencies, things that they want to work on, etc. Atlanta are off of a, pretty easy victory versus the Vegas Legion. When they win the S&D, they look great in the control. They pretty much close things out easily on the Embassy hardpoint. So with that, how does it go, right? How does this series go? So I actually want to pull up the fan poll because obviously it's going to go more for OpTic Texas. However, are there some people who are actually going to side with Atlanta here? Wow. Are we for real? Is this accurate? I got to refresh. 61.7% going with Atlanta over OpTic Texas. Now I want to give a hand clap to the fans of the CDL who are giving their honest opinion. They're not just going with who they like most. They're going with who they think is going to win. That is what you love to see. And I don't know, when it comes down to this series, I will go ahead and say it now. FaZe, I don't think is going to lose an S&D. I think the game 2 is pretty much already decided. It has been, I don't even know if OpTic needs to even load up for the S&D, to be frank with you. Just given how great Atlanta has been in their S&Ds. I mean, I forget what the streak is on right now, but they're on a record level. The last time they have lost a search and destroy, I believe, though, is versus OpTic Texas in that game 5 on Fortress. So it is pretty interesting, that we're going back all that way. But like I said, Atlanta looks clinical in S&D. This might be one of the best S&D teams that we've ever seen in COD history, by the way. Just given the record, given how dominant they have looked, it's been a wild run for them up to this point. Now, the one thing that I will say is that it's obvious, right? So FaZe is going to win the S&Ds, it sounds like. How does OpTic get away with this victory? It's going to be through the respawns, right? They're going to have to come out, win the opening hardpoint. The control very much could be up for grabs. Like I said, Atlanta has obviously looked much better in their controls lately. They have won 2, 3, 4, 5, 5-1 in their last 6. So they're looking phenomenal in their controls. The biggest emphasis for them is just strictly in the hard points. So if we're talking about how does this one go, like I said, I know I keep running back to it. Atlanta looks good to win the S&Ds. Atlanta looks better to win the control as well. It has got to be a game 1 and a game 4 W guaranteed for this, just to even potentially have the ability to go to a game 5. Now, what I will say is something that's very interesting about the Atlanta FaZe is that in all 7 losses this season that FaZe has had, all of those have one thing in common: a control loss. Every time that Atlanta FaZe has lost this season, the one common denominator is that they did lose the control. When they faced off against LAT beat them in the control. When who was it? OpTic ended up beating them. The last time they played, it was a reverse sweep, which started with the control. Whenever, I don't know, I'm looking at all the results. When Seattle beat them back at Major 1 in Raleigh, it came through the game 3 control. When New York beat them, it came down to the game 3 control, etc., etc., etc. If OpTic Texas wins this, it's going to have to be, to me, through all 3 respawns. Can they do it? I hesitate to say yes. I hesitate to say yes, just with how great that Atlanta has looked. I think that they are very aware of needing to identify their hardpoint problems. I think the S&D is in such a great spot that they really don't have to work on that. I'm very excited to see the matchup of Shotzi and Abizi. Both of those guys are lights out. When it comes to First Bloods, we know Abizi is king of the First Bloods. Shotzi is constantly getting involved in the early fights. So he and Hook, it's going to be up to them to try to slow down Abizi in those S&Ds. I don't think that's going to be possible, though. With that being the case, like I said, OpTic, they got to go flawless in the respawns. I don't think that happens. I think Atlanta wins the Game 2 S&D. I think Atlanta wins the control, and I think that Atlanta improves enough to where they also manage to win the Game 4 hardpoint. And if it does go down to a Game 5, which is possible, I still like Atlanta FaZe there as well. I just think right now for FaZe, they're in a good spot. They're looking pretty clean. And I feel confident going with FaZe in this pick. And I think in 4 maps is pretty accurate based off of how both these teams are going to come in and be looking. So let us go ahead and jump into the final series of Major 3 qualifiers. This is the last game before the Texas Major, and it's a classic one. It is LA Thieves v Boston Breach, and we are seeing a big emphasis on the LA Thieves, and the reason for that is because of the head-to-head. So these are actually all 4 matches in franchise history that these teams have seen against each other. As you can see lately, we've seen some close ones. So their most recent matchup, we saw it be a Game 5, Round 11, which is pretty interesting, right? I think that Boston went up 2-0 in that. Atlanta ended up responding back in a Round 5 control. They go all the way to a Game 5, Round 11. LAT takes that. And then prior to that, we're going back to August 4th, 2022. When was that? That was at COD Champs Winners Round 1, where LA Thieves managed to win that in a Game 5, Round 11 as well. So a lot of people are like, LA Thieves versus Boston. Oh, that's right. LA Thieves always beat up on Boston Breach. Not lately. Like, Boston has woken up. Boston has given it a very good shot in their recent matchups. I mean, even like, I remember Methods talking about that's going to be like one of his, in the matchup they had at Champs, it's one of the losses that he will remember pretty much for the rest of his career. What would have happened if they beat LA Thieves to kick off COD Champs? Because if they beat LA Thieves, does LA Thieves go on to win Champs last year? Probably not. So it's crazy. It's crazy how things end up winding out. So with that being the case, it's been a close, matchup lately. How does it go this time, right? How does it go this time? Lately for the Boston Breach, I don't know. Like, they obviously start off fantastic. You know, everybody's raving about how they beat Toronto, they beat London, they beat LAG. Like, this was Toronto with their old lineup. This was the London Royal Ravens. They should have lost that series. It's versus LAG, who's one of the worst teams in the league right now. They lose to Florida, give them their very first dub of the season. I was one to be excited about Boston, but also to recognize the fact that for Breach, are you technically on paper, 3-1? Yes, you should actually be 2-2, and the 2 wins that you have aren't unbelievably impressive wins at that. But obviously, like I said, they are 3-1 technically. They've had one of the easier schedules up to this point. How do they play now versus the Thieves? I don't know. Like, I really do like this change for the Boston Breach. I know I just kind of went out on a talking point to say, like, oh, I didn't really like Boston, and their record isn't accurate, all this stuff. I don't think that. But I will say for the Breach, facing off against the Thieves is a bit of a different beast. The Thieves are a team that I feel like always has the chance to beat you in multiple ways, in multiple modes. Boston lately has been so good. And their hard points, that's been one of their strongest emphases. Their controls as well have been where they've been seeing a lot of success. S&D is still, to me, a work in progress. I feel like they're getting better at it. So there is a chance there where you're talking about, Breach are starting to look more complete. Beans is now an extra element that they didn't previously have in these series versus the Thieves historically. Now they've got that next tier Slayer. Can Beans be the difference, right? Can he be the difference to get them over the hump of which they've yet to ever beat the Thieves in CDL franchise history? So how does this one go? I'm going to say that this one actually does go to a Game 5. I do. I think this goes to a Game 5. Is Beans the difference? I don't think so. I think the Thieves end up getting the job done. Boston lose their last 2 series in a row after starting off a perfect 3-0. And I think that Thieves, after their opening series loss versus Vegas, win 4 games straight and now look to be in a wonderful position going into the Texas Major on a 4-series win streak, and that being online, which is terrifying in itself. But I'm going to go ahead and lock in the predictions, save the picks, and that is how these things will wind out. So I was talking about how we had some really big games this week. I was specifically talking about these last 4. I've got 2 game 5s. I got 3 game 5s and 1 game 4 that also could be a game 5. So like I said, guys, we have got some major games when it comes down to the final week of our Major 3 qualifiers. Some bangers, some absolute bangers. Make sure if you have not done so already, let me know down in the comments where I went right, where I went wrong. What predictions do you agree with? Which ones do you disagree with? There are some amazing folks who always leave every single prediction down in the comments. I love seeing that. So feel free to let me know what your guys' thoughts are on some of these games. If you want to talk about those last 4 in particular, at least let me know where you're going with in those spots. And if so, where. I appreciate all the support on the series. You guys have been absolutely incredible. Make sure to stay tuned for the vlog that is coming out soon, and also some more content coming in from the Texas Major, whether that's pick'ems in Texas, if that's a vlog in Texas, whatever it may be. Stay tuned for more content because we got some things in the works. But thank you guys so much for the support. I will see you guys back here on the channel very soon. I'll see you for the matches, and I'll see you in Texas. Have a great night. I'll see you back on the channel real soon.